Bueno. Bueno, what up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the South Star Classroom. I'm your co-host, Omar Yanar. With me, as always, is our famed co-hosts, the beard of knowledge, Mr. David Castillo, the radiant, the amazing, the brilliant, our queen to be, actually not even queen to be, queen that is Miss Jubilee Ransom. I'm shaking things up today, ladies and gentlemen. Today's subject is about learning and books. And rather than the usual check-ins to see what's going on, I have asked this team to think of what are the three books that have meant something to them. And they don't need to be favorite books, just three books that have changed your paradigms, that have meant something to you, that you may have reread a few times. For our audience, I'd love for them to think about that. And then name three books and then share a little bit about one of them and what it meant to you. And given that I'm discussing it, I'll model it as I do in the classroom, as I do in all things in life. If I'm going to ask of something to be done, I'll model it. So the three books that I came up with for today's suggestions, and by no stretch of the imagination is this a limited list. These are just three books that I was like, oh, hey, man, these are three that really mean something to me, but are definitely not all of them. The first would be Sir Thomas More's Utopia. I have Sir Thomas More as a patron saint of politics, public policy, communications, legal things. He's in my backpack at all times. And I'll share a little bit about that book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And if you've not read that, that is a unbelievable book about philosophy and the journey of life. And while I have many books on political philosophy that are my favorite, I was talking about Jean-Jacques Rousseau's The Social Contract today, and an appropriate book for what's going on as the social contract of the United States starts fragmenting and dividing itself. But I will say that Utopia was absolutely one of my favorites, and still to this day one of my favorites, because while at the end Moore explains, I don't think this could ever happen, which is kind of a disappointing lament, it did paint a picture for what would happen in a society if people were deeply educated and didn't have to fight over hunger and starvation and shelter or limited resources. And the leaders actually gave a shit about people and their welfare versus themselves. And it got me always thinking about, well, even if Sir Thomas More, when he was working with King Henry VIII, who, by the way, had him beheaded, ugly news, because King Henry VIII wanted to get divorced, and Sir Thomas More, an ardent Catholic, was like, you can't do that. So he beheaded him and then created the Anglican Church, by the way, so that he could create divorce and marry Anne Boleyn. Thomas More was a brilliant man and was like, at least paved a path for me to think about, well, I can create a utopia. Maybe it's in a small little schoolhouse. Maybe it's in a small little organization, but I can damn well try to create it. And it's been my guiding force since. Jubilee, David, so good to see you all.
So good to see you too, Omar Yanar and David Castillo.
I hope I stalled just enough to give you all plenty of time to think about your books.
This is not hard, okay?
Oh, good.
This is not hard at all. But so my books are a mixed bag, and so I'll share why. And I got more than three. I could have went on and on, but
yeah, good.
Okay, so first, right, Leverage Leadership, because it was it's Paul Bamber Santoyo, who actually was a professor of mine when I was going through New Leaders. It was then New Leaders in Schools. And that book didn't exist yet, but it came out of his work, a lot of his work that he did with Uncommon Schools. And it's just, I have a copy. The pages are yellow, Post-it notes from 15 years ago. It, to me, is just a foundational tool for school turnaround, right? Some practical ways. I think it came out during a time where it's like people talk about school improvement and turnaround, but it's like, but how? And that book, the how, like how to schedule, how to do your observations, how to hold people accountable, like all the things. So that's one. Another is called Ryan Holiday's Ego is Enemy. And this is just about how ego gets in the way of doing real work. And I started reading this book when I bumped into a colleague that I was like, what? You seem so ego-driven. Like, do you even? So it just helped me to delve into it. And while I thought that I was reading it about some other person, I ended up learning and seeing my own self in the mirror, like, oh, you got an ego too. Boom. So that was that. And then we have some contemporary romance, right? So this author, her name is Kennedy Ryan. I love her books. I read a book called Before I Let Go. This Could Be Us, Long Shot, and I'm going to keep on going. But the reason why this is significant to me is because my friend and I were on the phone. We both been career educators and leaders and had only been reading leadership books and, business books and transformation books. But I'm like, what happened to the love of reading, not just to gain information and to learn, but enjoyment.
Enjoy the reading.
The enjoyment.
Yeah, man.
And so that is why one day I went to one of my favorite places, Barnes and Nobles. If y'all want to send me gifts, gift cards, Starbucks, Barnes and Nobles. Oh, and candles, Bath and Body Works. Right. But anyway, I went to my favorite place. And instead of going to leadership, spiritual, self-help, I went to romance and picked up this woman's book. And I have been in love ever since. So those are my three. They have changed my life in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, honorable mention, White Fragility.
Oh, that's a good ass one.
Guys,
yeah, there's tons. There's tons.
It made me feel
sick. Man.
Yeah. What's up, David?
I mean, David, what you got, brother?
Yeah. So it's interesting. The books that I read, they all kind of were around a particular time in my life. I mean, I still read, but I've become much more of like a technical reader, in my my current adulthood. But definitely did a lot of reading different kinds of stuff. So this goes back to I mean, these books I think were all like when I was anywhere between like 14 and like 25. It's kind of what I'm thinking of now. So The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. It was definitely like an eye opener for me. I was like, wow, man, it just opened up, so many doors around thinking about society and racism and reconciliation, all the things that we have not done. Science side, Stephen Hawking, Brief History of Time, right?
Okay.
Like getting out into the universe, cosmology, black holes, the nature of time, all those fun topics. But I was really into that for a long time. Met a couple of people in college that got me into the whole kind of like beat poets and that kind of literature. So I think Fear and Loathing was a big one for me by Hunter S. Thompson. It was kind of like, wow, man. Because it was also intertwined with real history, right? And the Chicano moratorium, right? And journalism, the nature of journalism, Dr. Gonzo. So that was an interesting one for me. And then I think the one that probably left the biggest mark, which was like, I think one of the first books that I really read, like for enjoyment when I was 14, was 1984 by George Orwell. I don't recommend 14-year-olds read this book. But I don't know how I got my hands on it, probably at a book fair. And I was like, oh, this looks fun. Had no idea. Read the book and I was like, wow, man, what is this, right?
Like showed up, dude. You're like,
it was not for a class. I was in middle school still, probably in the 8th or 9th grade. And I've always been kind of like dystopian kind of themes and concepts have always kind of attracted me. And there it is, this book's just all about like power and politics and society. And I'm like, is this where we've come from or is this where we're going to? And even then, I mean, the book was written in like the 40s or something like that. And even some of the themes around technology and like two-way like devices in people's rooms so the government could spy on you, like that technology existed, but it wasn't like commonplace in the home at the time. And now it's just like, it's our world, right? So it's also interesting. I'm like, what information did this guy have that we didn't have? And then I went on to read like Animal Farm and other things. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, that was again, my reading has shifted over time to like, again, it's like way more boring now. It's like more textbook, oriented, technical, shorter form. But I've been getting into the audiobook thing. So that's helped me to kind of get back and exercise that part of my brain. Not necessarily maybe what we're going to talk about today, but
actually it is.
Okay.
Totally is.
There you go.
Totally is. Totally is. It's a hell of a segue, and very good choices in all those books. And 1984, if you haven't read V for Vendetta, very similar scenario, absolutely badass. For those of you that love graphic novels, highly recommend it. Movie's not too bad either. We're talking about reading. So we have talked a ton about politics. We have talked a ton about Trump. And I just wanted to shake up the focus for today to be like, hey, let's go in a bit of a different direction, because the news is awesome in terms of how much fodder there is to discuss. But it's just like one calamity after another, after another, after another. And I'm like, EPLA started school Monday, yesterday. So our organization started our schooling this past Monday. A lot of El Paso schools are starting this week. A lot of schools are going to be starting in the next few weeks. California, probably a little bit on the later end, but it is truly kind of back to school time is in the air. And rather than talk about the calamitous situation that's going on with our respective state administrations and our federal administration, I was like, I want to talk about reading, because reading's been on the top of this list, not just The Kiss from Hall & Oates, David, but reading, fundamental, has been on my list. Reading is fundamental. You ever seen?
And you can't resist.
That's right. That's right. I will never resist, baby. Wolverines forever. It's been top of the list for a while. But what's going on is I read this fascinating article by Columbia's Teacher College, and it kind of started me down this wormhole. And the crux of this article is simple, ladies and gentlemen. College kids, because they're not writing papers, are getting literally dumber. Because AI is being used so prolifically in college, neurologically speaking, they're regressing. They're actually lowering their IQ, because the cognitive work, the lift in kind of applying your ideas and writing things out and having to think through it and create the structure and write the words is in itself an exercise, much like lifting a barbell or hitting a tennis racket. Writing itself becomes an exercise cognitively. And what they found is that that's lowering intellect. And of course, I get down the rabbit hole because I was like, dude, if lack of writing is lowering intellect, what is lack of reading doing? Because I'll tell you, I think the central crux of where a lot of kids are thinking is, why do I need to read when I've got videos, when I've got TikTok, when I've got all this stuff on visual media? And it got me thinking very open-mindedly. Okay, I hear you. I'm not going to argue right now as to what it could or could not do. Let me dive in and see what the research says. Y'all, the research is the research is exactly where you think it's going. So, spoiler alert for our entire audience: those who are not reading are getting radically dumber as we speak. The lack of reading, ladies and gentlemen, by MIT has demonstrated an exponential drop in critical thinking, in creative problem solving, and just basic neurological development. Meaning your brain ain't growing the way it's supposed to. You're not giving it the oxygen and the water and the sunlight. Like plants need all that shit for photosynthesis, right? Apparently your brain needs reading to grow. And if you're not giving it those growth things, that reading component, you are killing your brain. It is atrophying. And study after study after study is basically demonstrating the same thing. But check this out, David. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Because what we're going to do a little bit of talk today is that they have found scientifically that listening to a book, if focused, you're not doing 17 things at once. If you're actually kind of, you may be steaming a shirt or folding laundry, but you're listening to a book, you're listening to a podcast with good information on it, it has the same neurological effect as reading does.
Wow.
Which I thought was a massive surprise. I was like, no way that I think listening to a book would be the same as reading a book. It has the same positive neurological component, which is kind of what our questions are today.
Yeah.
In terms of reading, because I'm going to give just a quick snippet and allow you guys to read the questions, which I not only sent through text, but also in our private chat. If you haven't checked those out, they're right there. Mm-hmm. David, help me out because we got to broadcast them. But just a couple things on reading. Ladies and gentlemen, improves your cognitive function. Multiple brain areas start going off. So neurological studies where they study the brain, and they're like, hey, here's your book. Here's your brain when you're doing nothing and it's kind of dark. Here's your brain when you're reading, and all of a sudden, all these areas start like lighting up. Not only engages multiple brain areas and enhances your memory and attention and problem-solving skills, connects brain areas, much like speaking languages connects these kind of roads, these synapses in your brain, that it's like one highway connecting to the other, connecting to the other. It makes you smarter and connects those neurological pathways. Apparently reduces stress and anxiety. For all those kids that are stressed out as you're doom scrolling, get a fucking book. Read a book, baby. It will lower that stress and improve your reduce cortisol levels and improve your mood. Boosts creativity, because as your imagination gets stimulated about different ideas, your brain starts developing neurological pathways for creative thinking. Yeah. Enhances vocabulary and language. You want to talk hot? Guys, gentlemen, you want to talk hot to them ladies? You want to write some poetry? You want to be a French poet? You need to read a book, for Christ's sakes. Ladies, on the other end, you're hitting me up in the DMs, and your grammar is dog shit. You got it here. I think so lowly of you. When you're hitting me up in the DMs, your grammar's terrible. Read a book. You got to get your syntax right. And you're all boring as shit. You're sending me these what's ups and hellos. Send me some poetry. I'm sending out Shakespearean quatrains, and you're sending me sups.
What you doing?
Omar, I did not realize that we were going to get right into your weekly rant, but this is lovely. Keep it going.
This is it.
I'm giving you all time to just read whatever you need to read to be ready for the questions, but I'm gonna keep it going real quick. It slows your cognitive decline. Alzheimer's, dementia, if you're reading books, ladies and gentlemen, keeps your brain strong like eating an apple. Strengthens, like I said, your neurological connections. It activates and strengthens those neural pathways so that your memory gets better, your critical thinking gets better, your processing gets better.
Yeah.
It's, ladies and gentlemen, you may not like eating your fruits. You may not like eating your vegetables, but eating your fruits and vegetables gives your body power and strength. Reading a book is like doing that. Now, check this out. As we were talking, we have found that listening can be as effective for your brain as reading. So those of you that like, hey, I'm cheating, I'm listening to this book on audio book, you're not cheating. It turns out you're not. All these college and clinical studies have demonstrated that listening to a book on Audible has the same positive effects as reading because it's engaging your imagination, your neural pathways, your critical thinking, and your thought, because you're listening to information and not that garbage. What is that? That Lost Island garbage that's going on right now. What is that? That's everyone's watching, that Lonely Island, the Lost Island, the Love Island. Love Island. I sound like an old man. I am an old man. Love Island. It's garbage, kids. It's ruining your brain. This is what happens when Doc's away, ladies and gentlemen. I want everyone to know when the doctor's away, the kid will play.
We're going to try to get you on an episode of Love Island. Let's see if they'll have you on there so you can do your rant about the necessity.
I will get so kicked off in a minute, and no one will understand my vocabulary. I'll get kicked off the island just for people not even understanding my vernacular. Like, you got to go. Get the hell out of here, man. I can't even get on the island. I'm too damn old to be on that island. But ladies and gentlemen, this kind of gets us into our discussion today about reading, about how important it is, how incredibly pronounced this skill set can be. But it's 21st century. So what are some ways that we can make this more effective? So in our slew of questions, if you want to post the first one for our audience, for our team, as I've spouted all these facts. It turns out that situations listening might be even more effective than reading for comprehension and vice versa. So the question is, in what situations might listening be more effective than reading for comprehension and vice versa? Y'all are both educators. Let's just start with that one. Imagine you have the choice of listening or reading. For our audience, we're like, hey, what can I do for our kids? What are some things that our kids can be doing that may not be sitting down in a book and reading because they're riding a bus, because, they're walking home? That's just our first postulate.
The text is too, high for them and they can't access it, But this is 20 years ago. First of all, I don't even know that listening and reading should be compared, honestly, because they serve their own function. Mm-hmm. And listening and its effectiveness precedes reading, right? Precedes books, right? Like storytelling, oral tradition, those kinds of things preceded books, right? Books came around to kind of encapsulate what we were saying, but that had been a foundational way of like building understanding, right? And then somebody found a way to put it into writing into a book, and it's like, okay, well, now this is better. And it's like, well, it's not better. It's just another way to put forth information that can be consumed and help to develop understanding, right? So I think when I think back to my classroom experience, like we always had like a listening center, right? Nowadays, I know that I've seen it in some schools still, but it was very popular, right? And it was another way to engage students, especially your lower readers who couldn't necessarily access the grade level text, because I was a third grade teacher and I had some students that were reading on the kindergarten or first grade level. So perhaps they couldn't access Charlotte's Web themselves. But if I put them in a listening center, right, and gave them the text to follow along, then they'd be able to access the text, And so I think that's, sorry, I have teenagers here, lots of teenagers. Great. Anyway.
Are they reading?
They actually, one of them said to me the other day, I hate books. I hate reading. And I was like, you are not allowed to hate reading. Your ancestors died so that you could read. That's not allowed. And this, I don't really say that about much things, but reading, no. I don't even know if I can convince you to love it, but just understand that it's a necessity. But anyway, back to the question. So listening, I think, could be more effective if we're going to compare them, to really bridge the gap when you're working with lower level readers, but also as a tool for motivation and engagement. One day, this past school year, I walked into a class in high school, and I know a bunch of them in there were COVID babies, which means they had a chunk of their educational experience robbed from them. 2 years, depends on how long they stayed out. And I think they did down here stay out of school at least 2 years or a year and a half. And the babies were listening and reading. It was a book like Be Like Martin or something like that. And the babies were in the book, 9th, 10th grade students. Not all of them were on that level, but they were in that book. And when the teacher posed the question, whatever that prompt was, like, do you think he should have broke up with her or decided not to be friends with him anymore? Whatever the question was, they were in it to win it, engaged in the conversation, engaged in dialogue, critiquing responses of other students. And it was absolutely lit. It was dope, right? So I think you can still have rich conversations and still access text when you're able to do it or have an entry point by way of listening. So I'll stop there.
Well said.
All right. I would say, like, in terms of listening versus reading, I think in general, like listening for like the lighter, maybe like less technical subjects, right? But when you get into like really text heavy and like technical details and things that, you might need to like read once over, twice over. I just think at least that's the way that my brain works. So I think overall, I would suggest that, the lighter, more leisurely kind of, conversational stuff is fine for listening. I do think that, there's Jubilee said something about, learners that may not be able to access, reading at a certain level. So I think, audio is good there. I think also the whole world of like dyslexia, right? Which doesn't go away, right? The dyslexia is something that you live with forever. makes sense. Also for now I'm thinking about like listening for students with ADHD, or even like young boys that have the need, and young girls that have the need to like get up and move around, right?
Yeah.
Sitting and like reading a book can be very challenging, even for adults. So is there a world where we could do a combination of reading, but also audio? Like you can like listen to something and you could be walking, taking a body break, right? Going out, doing those things. So, I mean, definitely like maybe like romanticize the time when all we had was books and you had to go to the library and check. There was 2 of each book. And if they were checked out, you had to wait, and so it was kind of like this era of like, books were very like a prized possession. Now it's proliferated. Like you can get most everything online, if not for free on YouTube, through the other applications. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's just kind of democratized information, literature for everybody, not just here in this country, but throughout the world. Let's see. You asked about the combination of So I think, overall, I think it's really, if you're an educator or even if you're a parent, I think there's a time and place for both. You just have to figure out what the right context is, right? But I still, and I've said this before on the show, I appreciate, I have different levels of appreciation for my son's English teacher from last year. I've shared good and bad, but one of the things was that they read 4 books last year. They read a book a quarter, like paperback books.
It's awesome.
And I appreciate that. It's like, that's really important, especially in this time where kids are so like, we talk about it all the time. They're online, they're on their phones, they're on their computers, but like getting kids to like sit, read a book, slow down, I think is good for the brain.
Deeply. And I think all of that was well said. I would only add that we have a humongous emerging bilingual population at the El Paso Leadership Academy. It's a prolific population that's growing across the country, specifically in the Southwest. And I think that students who are learning English, whether it be Latino students or any student, could absolutely be favored from the listening and reading in combination with one another. So as you're looking at this text and listening to this text and stopping and kind of doing some translation, it's really good to hear those words sounded out, so that as you're learning to read in English, you're getting that they're getting that rich experience of listening. And I think that, our students also, walk and ride the buses. And it's like, dude, like, listen to the book that way. Listen to the book on the way home. Like, you've got headphones. Every kid has headphones. And regardless, dude, I've seen like all of our kids, man, regardless of like their income, like they're all carrying a phone. I'm like, dude, you got Audible. Like we're going to download all these books on audio on the EPLA like website. Like there it is, free, like jam into that. And I think it's such a useful component, because I know you're listening to music and that's wonderful, but the switch over to a book is so radical in terms of how much that can change the neurological dynamic, but it also gives access. Like you're part of a conversation now that's going to be happening at school, and you're able to access it where you didn't have access. There are certain moments where I think that reading is quite helpful. So I think you said like, hey, if you're reading something technical, you get to reread it. Like, absolutely. I find that if it's fiction, I can listen to it while like getting ready in the morning, being totally fine. If it gets way too technical, I need to have it in front of me because I'm highlighting it and writing notes.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of where the vice versa happens. But I think the goal is, parents out there, you're like, hey, what can we do? Help your children listen to books. Help your children kind of devise time where they're just sitting down and reading. And that may not have to be an hour, but if it's 20 minutes, that is a magnificent jump in their reading. And here's another one. Reading in Spanish, reading in your native language to a child is also extraordinarily effective. I don't even know if y'all knew this. I had to look this one up. Having books in the house, just having them, not even reading them. Just the fact that there are books in the house actually raises the cognizance of kids and reading just by having them in the house. It's like, oh, this is important. We see these every day. There's something about having a book in the house that triggers something mentally that says, oh yeah, absolutely. Like, this is of importance. So even having books in the house, parents, is of profound importance. And as we go back to school, I always think to myself, hey, what are the conversations that we're having with parents that are like, well, I don't understand the language. What can we do? It's like, well, like, read a book that you can read in your native language, and it's as effective, 20 minutes. Make sure a kid is reading to themselves and maybe listening to audio, 20 minutes. Even like, hey, come talk to us. We'll give you books for free. Have books in the house. And a child can access those. And like, hey, man, I'm bored. Well, then here's this book. Check this book out. And it really needs to, the idea about being around the grade level is super important. Yes, sir.
You got me thinking about a practice that we instituted at Oakland Unity High School. Now, probably, like, what are we? We're like 2025. So this is like maybe 15 years ago or more.
Okay.
Where we incorporated an actual period in the school day. So we had any given school day would be period 1, period 2, period 3, lunch, advisory. And then after advisory, we would have a 20-minute SSR period, silent, sustained reading, and then periods 4, 5, 6, right?
Yeah.
And what SSR was is silent, sustained, and there's like mixed results in terms of the science of the effectiveness of SSR. I get it, but literally it was an opportunity for the entire campus to shut down and go quiet. Teachers were reading too. We would read, like, we would all, and maybe there wasn't an overall like impact on like literacy scores, but it definitely shifted the culture around reading and literacy and the value of like slowing your brain down. And they could not read books that were for an assignment or a project or a class. We had a big library. Yeah. They had to check them out, and it had to be reading for like personal interest, right? With reading logs and all that stuff. I'm going down the rabbit hole, but yeah, you're taking me back. And these are kids that maybe probably didn't have libraries in their homes, right? The parents probably didn't have bookshelves of stuff up. Maybe they did, probably not. So we did it in school. We created that culture within the school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I think the joy of reading is to be modeled by all educators. And I think that it might be missing. But when I was reflecting as you both were speaking to like when I would run to class, or even when I hear students really excited about being in a specific class, or my son's being excited about going to a specific class, most likely there's a teacher there that's excited about whatever the content is. It's like, today we're going to dissect a frog. And it's like, I got to get there early. I can't be late, right? Today we're going to read about, Miss So-and-so wants to know who found the metaphor on page 74. Like, do we care? Like, in the grand scheme of life, maybe not, right? But when you show that level of enthusiasm around a text, right, or any content area, then students pick that up, right? And so I think that's one of the key things, right? Like, the idea is to keep kids motivated about reading, about all the possibilities that you can tap into because you're a reader, all the worlds that you can explore without getting on an airplane until you are able to get on the airplane, right? All the worlds you can explore just going through a book, all the lives and the context you can understand because it's in a book, right? And I think we can't get anywhere without educators who are passionate. I remember, and maybe you probably had teachers like this too, Dr. Steger, with walking through a yellow page book because she had it so long, it was folded, it was a paperback, so she had it folded, and she knew that book by heart, baby. She knew what was on page 68. She knew what questions she was going to ask. And we would get into fiery debates about whatever happened in chapter 3 because Dr. Steger, she, she internalized whatever that text was, and she brought us into it. And so now a topic that we wouldn't otherwise care about as 17-year-olds or 11-year-olds, now we care, and we're in debate about it because our teacher modeled that for us and held the line for like, no, reading is fundamental, but it can also be fun. And it can also help us build pathways of understanding and engaging in complex conversations.
Pathways of understanding.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my rant there. But I had some great reading teachers. Okay. I love reading. I don't even remember learning how to read, but I remember how amazing my teachers were at getting us to want to read. And we can't lose that.
And I think that like that, dude, competitions amongst books, you just led right into it. So like, how can individuals or educators tailor their learning strategies based on these cognitive differences and getting kids excited? So like, to answer Bill, we love you, man. Thank you for always jumping in. Your passion is welcome here at any time. You think I go on some rants, man. Bill goes on some badass rants. I love reading them. I love him as a member of this community. And he said, hey, check this out. Like, you can't replace phonics. Those things have to happen in reading, of course. So in this question of what are the things that we can do to tailor strategies in terms of listening, I gave a great example. Like, you're an emerging bilingual student, you've got some coherence of English, but you're learning it, listening and reading at the same time could be a fundamental jump in your reading ability. Nicole said something badass, like pause the reader and use the app's notation features. Absolutely. Like if you're reading on a tablet and you're reading on a computer, the reading, not the listening, gives you the ability to look up definitions, basically get into what other modifications can be used to give access to this material that would otherwise not be available on the listening platform. Hard to teach phonics when you're just listening to text. And I think, just to make an answer, I don't think SSR is the end all be all here, Bill. I'm just saying, I think we're all saying that in addition to the great teaching, SSR or a sustained period of reading daily, whether it's happening at home or in school. And dude, oftentimes we had to do it at school because we just know like it wasn't happening at home. So we did it. That was a strategy we used. So I'll jump to Jubilee. Jubilee, you are like the master of curriculum. And you may have a master's in curriculum. What would you do to tailor some of these strategies based on the differences between learning and listening and reading?
Yeah, I think nothing's going to replace, and I think somebody said it earlier, that nothing replaces the foundational pieces. So I think we've got to stay strong and get good at those foundational pieces, because that does become the roadblock when students are trying to access more complex text. Like you've got to know the difference between there, and there. Like, unless you're gonna, I'll never forget years ago on a New York.
That's such a good example.
I mean, yeah, because then it's going to impact your listening and how you hear and how you make meaning of the story you're listening to. If you don't know the difference, but that stuff is supposed to be taught, K through 2, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't get that, then it just is more difficult. I remember a state test years ago had the word dove, right? But how is dove spelled? Like dove. And a bunch of students got that question wrong because they were saying it as dove. And if they're looking for a bird, there is no bird. They're talking about a man that dove to get a ring that fell in a pond or something like that. He dove into the pond, but they were looking for a dove. So their whole, making meaning piece was all messed up because they didn't get it. So I agree.
And that's what it sounds like, Jubilee, when the doves cry.
Right. So K through 2, right? The early reading, like I think we
making himself laugh. That's good.
Get good with that. We got to stay with that. We've got to make sure that our children are leaving having mastered these foundational pieces. I think once they understand the the foundation, once they understand, right, all the different nuances, the phonemic awareness, the phonics, the phonemes, that whole piece around phonological awareness, and word and how to make words and roots of words and all, then everything else you can just build on that. But without that, everything is definitely confusing. And then I would say shout out to you, Omar, because when I went to visit El Paso, the one time that I had the pleasure of visiting, one of Omar's students greeted me, and I don't know, was he in 7th grade? I can't remember. All I know is English was his second language, and he greeted me in English. I did not realize that he had just come to the country maybe 3-4 months before I was there. And I'm like, oh my God. And it's because you all have this bilingual model, right? You're not asking students to abandon their home language in order to learn a new one. You know how I feel about this whole like assimilation thing, right? So it's bilingual education because we can use your home language as a bridge to learn this new language, right? Like, how do you say bread in Spanish? All right, this is how you say bread in English, as opposed to asking folks to abolish their home language. So I think same with listening to books and reading books, like as much as possible, especially with this generation, using them in tandem, right? Because I know I said earlier that I used to use them a lot for lower readers, but for on grade level and above grade level readers, it works as well when you want them to engage with and access more complex text, right? And you want them to hear the word and you want them to see it like, oh, the word is vicariously. I don't know what the heck that means, right? But I heard them say and I see it in the text, and now I'm adding to my vocabulary, right? So I think a strategy is definitely using the listening and the reading in tandem for all level readers. I don't think we should have ever like gotten rid of that as a practice. And vocabulary is the other piece, right? Consistently introducing vocabulary tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, so that students building on their vocabulary and then they can access more complex texts. Those are my thoughts.
So yeah, Dave, you got any thoughts on this one?
I think Jubilee covered it. I mean, she's definitely much more of an expert than I am around this particular topic. I mean, I'll just say briefly, I think it's important to understand, even as early elementary, what the learning profile is for each individual student in your classroom and in your school. Especially for, English language learners, engaging with their families, collecting like qualitative information, talking to actual students and finding out how, they feel like they best learn. And then providing as many different types of opportunities to learn skills and information through a variety of ways, of modalities, right? Because we all learn in different ways. And so we should all have access to different ways of learning and accessing information. I don't think it's not a push against like whole group instruction. I think there's a lot of value to whole group instruction.
Yeah.
I think it's okay for students to be in a whole group setting and to struggle, to know what it's like to struggle. And I think that's fair. But I think you also have to provide that personalization as well on top of that. So, this is not rocket science. It's stuff that the tools are out there to be able to do this. So I think it definitely applies to what we're talking about here in terms of, how information is presented, whether it's on paper or audio or teachers reciting it, either way.
Yeah. And I just want to add, are we on to given the role of attention and distraction and listening, how can technology? Okay.
Right. It's right there. There it is.
Yeah.
Right there.
Okay, great. Awesome. So it just has me thinking about the need for thinking jobs, right? If reading is about processing and making meaning, then as educators, we are responsible for fostering, conversation around the reading, whether it's a book, an article, or what have you. What's the thinking job around it? What's the prompt? So to engage that whole cognitive piece. All right. So if we just have you read chapter 3. All right. But if I say read chapter 3 and look for find allegory, right? Read chapter 3 and find a synonym for vicariously, right? Now the brain is searching for something specific, and now it's building, and now it's looking, and now it's like, okay, I got it. So I'm paying attention, because we could also just be rote readers, just run of the mill, right? How many times you read a page and realize I didn't understand what the hell it was. So I didn't even.
Right, exactly.
I was daydreaming. I was thinking about buying some Dipsy Doodles. I don't know what they. Right. So you need that cognitive piece. You need those prompts to keep you focused.
Yeah.
And then you need a conversation that helps to engage, keep you motivated, but also cement whatever the learning is from that chapter. And this is why we need teachers, right, who are building lesson plans around this stuff and engaging students in this way.
Yeah, I think that's great. Go ahead, Dave.
I mean, I think on this particular piece, I mean, the only plug I'll make is for just technology in general. I think, there's technology is a double-edged sword, but I think if used properly, like Jubilee said, like, here's your assignment, you got to go and listen to chapter, whatever it is in particular book. Here are the guiding questions. And at the end, they're responsible for, and it can be something simple like a multiple choice check for understanding. Doesn't have to be super deep, but all that data comes back to the teacher instantly. They don't have to grade a single thing. They can look at stuff and run it through a rubric or whatever. And so I feel like, technology is actually, if used properly, has advanced the ability of teachers to do a lot of this work and to figure out like who's struggling and who's doing well. And also to give students, like credit. Like if I'm asking you to read chapter 1, and if I don't see a grade in the grade book for me having read chapter 1, I'm going to have a lot less motivation to read chapter 2. Right.
Right.
So I think both those angles of like assessment, but also like grading.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would add just like a couple things. So I've got this, I did some research into this out of just like selfishness. And I was like, some people are like, Omar, like you're like steaming clothes while you're listening to me, or you're like doing chores or folding clothes while you're listening to me. Like, what's up with that? Like, I'll do that. Like, I'll have meetings throughout the day. And if I tend to be at home, I'll have my headphones on and do that. And I'm like, no, you don't get it. Like for me, focusing on a remote chore that requires no intelligence allows me to listen significantly better, because it's a stimuli that I need to stimulate my brain, because otherwise I will focus on something else, or I will stare at something else when listening to somebody because I'm focusing my attention on their words. And I was like, am I nuts? Probably. I know I am. Am I slightly autistic? Probably. But I find out neurologically that in the advancement of technology with audiobooks and podcasts and so forth, what you can do is you're doing those 2 things at a time. If it's 3 things at a time, what happens is that like your attention gets scattered. But if you do one activity that does not require brain work, walking, riding on the bus, riding on the subway, doing chores, folding clothes, all those things, especially chores, man, that's a big one, because it doesn't, like raking leaves, like watering, like washing the car, whatever it may be, that does not require heavy lift neurological work. So you could be listening to books, and that is a spectacular time. Dude, I do it every single morning and every single night when I'm like getting ready for bed or like showering in the morning. I've got like a waterproof speaker. I'm listening to podcasts and books and like rifling through them, and my brain is still like highly active. Driving, that's a really good time to listen to audiobooks. Driving on the train. So like how do we modify these things to lessen the distraction? I actually say, in one respect, a non-neurological distraction, like all of those that I just mentioned, actually help you listen a great deal better. One thing that I would ask our kids to do is like, hey, your parents can access this. Your job, listen to this. Now write it and explain it to your parents. Summarize this thing and now explain it verbally to your parents, and explain and see if they picked up on what you read. Like, that's a great way. And then Bill would love this. Up the Bloom's taxonomy. If you summarized it, now do analysis, now do inference, now get into hypothesis. What's going to happen in the next chapter? Why do you think that's going to happen in the next chapter? So just adding on to what David and Jubilee said, but anyone could do this. So like if you're listening to an audiobook and you're hypothesizing, your brain is igniting in high level neurological thinking. and developing its brain to be like, oh crap, like, dude, every whodunit book, every detective book. I love reading Sherlock Holmes. I'm always trying to figure out who did this, why did they do this? Like my brain's always on and I love it. And that activates brain activity in a really fundamentally positive way. Dude, we're almost out of time, so we got to jump to the last question, man. How should schools and institutions, even home, adapt their teaching methods for students who struggle with reading? So if you look at the rest of the question, I put it in the private chat because it got cut off on the text. Who struggle with decoding texts but have strong listening comprehension skills. And it's like, what role could audiobooks play? So if kids are struggling with reading text, how does the listening, what would you do to put in the listening component? Would you have kids read aloud? We do that sometimes. So like, forget about just listening to audio. Kids reading aloud to one another in class, absolutely helpful. So typically the teacher will read, I'm like, you lose your attention span. But if you pocket it where the teacher reads one paragraph and then a student reads another and a student reads another, that's a really good example of listening, and kids are hearing these different voices and it's triggering their attention span because the different voices are reactivating the attention span. It's kind of what Sesame Street does, where they switch around, not just skits every like 2 to 3 minutes, but Elmo's talking, then Grover's talking, then Cookie Monster's talking. They do that on purpose. It activates that. So I'd love for you all to think, hey man, what can parents do? What our teachers can do with the listening component that can help them decode text better so that they get better comprehension skills with the listening and the reading?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm big on just using like real world examples, right? So you just said like Sesame Street, or I might find if a lot of these kids like anime, right? Or let's just say I'm trying to understand, help them understand how to track a conversation amongst multiple characters in the text, right? And I know that the decoding, right, is going to be a barrier, but you watch TV, right? So you watch anime. So let's pull this episode, right, and see if you can track the conversation, and let's debrief that, right, and find a way, right, to show like, so you see in your books, right, when you're listening to this text, right, who are the characters, and right, and be able to get them to pull out who are the character, who's the main character, who's the antagonist, who's the protagonist, who's the right, and just kind of bridge the gap so that they can see, because a lot of times children that are not reading well, especially if they're older and still struggling, right, they are lacking confidence, right?
Exactly.
And don't necessarily feel safe to make a mistake, to fail, right? And so part of what I do, if I have to, teach reading to children who are older but are reading on a very low level, is to say, you are already doing a lot of this, right? You may not necessarily have the words down pat, but you're doing a lot of this. You know how to follow a conversation. And so now this book that you're going to be listening to has these characters. So let's apply what you do here to how you listen to this text, right? So little things like that, just bridging the gap, right? And then in terms of the decoding, I mean, technology, I think it's one of the best things to close the gap, to use to close the gap. We're talking about just being able to decode basic words that can then be built on later on, right? So if you're showing videos or you're playing, a listening thing where they have flashcards and things like that, use it. Use it. Because the truth of the matter is, when teachers a lot of times will say, there's just not enough time. Like these are 7th graders. We don't have phonics time built into our block, right? We don't have time for that. And it's like, well, listening, having that component where it's a center where you have students go off, you give them a thinking job, a task that they're responsible to do in a very truncated time. That's like, it's a short amount of time, but it's very focused time. And they're just reading, listening to these words and repeating after whatever they hear. That can still be a way to build up their skill set, even if you're not able to provide direct instruction. So I think we may have always been in this day and age where you definitely need to maximize your reading block, where you are not always at the forefront of everything that's happening in the reading block. You're over here teaching a small group, or you had to do your model lesson and you got a listening center over here, and you got some kids peer reading over here, and they all are serving a purpose, right? But the teacher does not have to lead all of them. They just have to plan for them. And I don't know if teachers would agree with that, but that's what we had to do when I was teaching, and it worked. So there's that.
I think just to tack on to that, and not repeating what I said earlier, but I think more concretely, like when I was teaching high school social science, like we used everything from, the textbook, right? Which we would actually use as a primary source document to like search for and identify like bias and all this stuff, whatever. And then pulled in like a lot of other supplementary materials, like short passages from, Howard Zinn, whatever. We would help to break it down in short chunks. We would also, like look at political cartoons, right? And break down like graphics, right? We would use graphic novels, right? We read Mouse, every year. And so you can still get to the same place of being able to move from like comprehension of themes to like analyzing, right? And creating new knowledge, or getting to the point where like, do you understand what you're reading here? And can you what assumptions are you making? Can you compare and contrast? You can still do all of those things.
Yes, 100%.
Via a number of different ways of presenting information. And now it's like proliferated again with, the use of all the apps and everything. So it's kind of, I'm sure it's an overwhelming time, but probably also a very exciting time to be a teacher, if you're given the right professional development and guidance, right?
Yeah. And we're about 3 minutes out. So I kind of want to jump us into final thoughts on the subject. And I'll twist it all together, my comment and my final thoughts, so that you all can take us out of the show. One, just for our boy Alonzo, thank you for asking. He was like, hey man, what happened to cursive? And cursive kind of lost its way as a result of the advent of keyboarding. So as keyboarding and technology came into fixture as a methodology to write, we felt like it was, we educators felt that learning how to type on a keyboard was a bit more effective than cursive. We still teach handwriting. It's incredibly important because the actual neurological work that happens when you go pen to paper is in fact different than when you type. I do a lot of pen to paper, a lot, and then I'll put it onto the type. And both have, again, that's its own show. They both have their own like neurological positives and limitations. And I would argue that both are fine. But sadly, because we're no longer writing forlorn letters to our wives in the Civil War, or to our significant others, regardless of gender, across the seas. Sadly, cursive has no longer been a thing, although I'll tell you what, I still write letters and postcards, and they're fun. I do write in print. But the last thing I'll end this on is pretty simple, which is one thing that you can do, teachers and parents, and Jubilee mentioned this earlier, so I'm really just repeating her, is to say that you love reading and to get kids inspired to read is one thing. I'm huge on incentives. What are the positive incentives, the competitions? So we have competitions. How many books can this advisory read over this advisory? Hey, what's the literacy score? We test every single 3 weeks of this advisory versus this advisory. Which one jumped up higher? So that reading becomes something that students are not only engaging in because we love it, because it's accessible, because teachers are enthusiastic about it, but because the kid is finding a short-term reason to be like, I'll give this a shot. Next thing you know, a kid finds something that they really enjoy reading, and they're like, I want more of this. Give me more of this, and I'll have it. And parents, it could be that simple. You reward your kid with a dinner, or an ice cream sundae, or even just ice cream. Hey, we're going to go out to ice cream if you can finish this book or read a chapter. You don't need, it doesn't even need to be that complicated. Read that chapter and explain it to me, and we'll go out for an ice cream. And I mean, honestly, I think the positive incentive can help a ton.
Agreed. We're at time.
Closing thoughts? Yeah, we're at time. That's my closing thought. Y'all have closing thoughts on the subject?
I'll go and then I'll toss it to you, David. I just think to add on to what you said, like let's just keep reading alive. Let's keep the joy of it alive. And I know it's been tough. Bill, I think, said that our kids couldn't read before COVID, and this may have been true. But this is something that our nation's always been solving for. And of course, we're sad to see. We're happy about science of reading emerging. Sad that it took 30 years of wrong practice and people making millions of dollars off the back of kids to be like, oh, that actually wasn't right. So we've got our own things to deal with as it pertains to that. However, the fact still remains that reading is fundamental, and we still need to keep solving for it and figuring out how to meet our students, our children, where they are, because it's something that we just need them to be able to do. And we still are responsible, for them. So that's my thought. Like, find different ways to incentivize, find different ways to encourage families to do, small things at home. And a lot of times, I remember when my sons were younger, and I was like, I'm gonna paste words all around the house, and I'm gonna put vocabulary words in the bathroom. And one of my good friends, who was the literacy coach at home at the school I was AP at, was like, "Girl, no, just talk to them, just have conversations with them." And so there are little things that we can do as parents and educators that keep that joy alive, that keep that interest alive. And we just, I would hope that we would find out the very small things we can do and stick to it and keep hope alive, keep joy alive. Reading is fundamental.
Yeah. I mean, I think overall, I think reading is a very healthy practice. I'm talking about actually like sitting down and like reading a book. I think it's good for the brain. I think it slows down the brain in a very fast-paced and noisy world. So I think there's some like therapeutic value there. But again, it all starts very early on. And, outside of being able to control what happens in the homes of students that, schools serve, the schools have the responsibility to do that work early on, starting in kindergarten, in transitional kindergarten. I mean, I remember the moment when I was at home. My son was probably it was probably like May of his kindergarten year. And I was doing some work on one of my computers, had a big monitor. He was on my lap, and he started to read off some of the words on the Google Doc that I was working in. And I was like, wow, like that. I was there for that moment when he actually, and I texted his kindergarten teacher, and we're still friends to this day. And I was like, it was a whole journey after that. And I think with, having spent time working in elementary programs and watching individual students, and sometimes it happened in the 4th grade, sometimes in the 5th grade. And the later it happened, like you could see that once a student was able to turn that corner and they could like then join the, learning to read, to reading to learn movement, it was transformational for them. It was transformational. So I think that's still kind of the root of the issue, the problem that we're trying to solve. So, but I think, great show, Omar.
Hey man, I enjoyed it. Dude, the comments were on fire. Thank you to our entire audience, Alonzo, Bill, Nicole. We love hearing from you all. Viktor Frankl's Man Searching for Meaning, man. It's a great book. On behalf of Dr. Charles Cole, whose birthday is tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, wish Dr. Charles Cole a happy birthday. Our Beard of Knowledge, David Castillo, our Queen, Jubilee Ransom. I've been Omar Yanar. Tune in next week, ladies and gentlemen. Same bat time and same bat channel for more of the South Star Classroom. We'll see you next week. Peace.
I don't know how to do this one. Let me see if it's going to work.